Yeah. Okay, that should do it. All right, we are recording and it is in progress. Ladies on Zoom, I have to send you a copy of the study guide, but it's okay. You don't really need it until next week. The study guide is going to be a week by week thing. So now that I know who definitely is on Zoom, so to speak, I will get that out to you beforehand. Basically, the way I'm doing the study guide is a little bit different than what I did in the past. I'm going to give you highlights of what I'm saying. And that'll make it easier for you all to take notes and whatnot. And then at the tag end of the packet, there's a series of reflective questions, which I am entitling study questions for you to think about. Some of them we may even go over depending on how long the class lasts at any point in time. Okay. Wait a second. And where's chat? There's chat. Let me bring chat up so I can read what Kay is saying. Will not be in class next week. Okay. Yeah, I think you told me that, Kay, and I will send you out the paperwork so you can continue to follow the recording. Each of our classes, for those of you who are here, because the ones there know they've been involved a while, we record. There is on the Learn tab at the church website page. Okay, if you go across that top banner, you'll see a word that says Learn. If you put your cursor over that, okay, a drop-down series of boxes comes up. And one of the things that's on that is Hope You YouTube channel. All right. So if you go to that YouTube channel, you will find the recording of what we have. So if you miss a class or it's confusing, because I can be confusing, we all know that. That's why we're calling this a mystic class. But it gives you an opportunity to go back and review again if you want. For anybody, and I know it's falling on deaf ears with those who normally are with me, but if you have a question during the week, you guys know where I am. Okay, you can text me, you can call me, or you can trip me up in the hallway. All right, and then as you're helping me up, you can ask your question and we'll try and answer. All right, so I want to first ask, who knows what mysticism means?
There's a mystery.
Mysterious.
Oh, that was a serious question. And if there are no serious answers or thoughtful answers or any answer, what do you think mysticism is? Maybe that's a better way.
I always thought it was like supernatural something.
Okay, Alona says can you hear her? Did you hear her say supernatural something? Okay. Anyone else?
I think it means something we don't know a whole lot about, that we kind of wonder about, that has sort of an aura of maybe magic, or who knows, something that's not normal.
Okay.
Mystery, from mysticism, a mystery of the supernatural. Mystery, trying to understand it.
Did Christ speak about mysticism?
Mhm.
We're going to find
Yeah, I
out.
think he did. Yeah,
You think he did?
I think you did. I think you talked, we didn't call it mysticism, I guess, but he called it just, spiritualism, higher level, anything that was beyond the senses that he talked about, knowing, the knowingness of beyond the senses.
Okay. All right. And you're going to learn, and I'm going to give it away right now. Although mysticism has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, even back before the time of Christ, it wasn't for Christianity defined as such until Paul was recognized as being the first Christian mystic in 500 AD. Okay, so even though it was around and people were recognized as being mystics, it wasn't really for Christians nailed down to a certain extent of what it was and what it meant until someone decided and wrote that Paul was a mystic and explains why. And you're going to hear about all that. Okay.
Pastor K just had a comment.
Oh, okay. Thank you. An absorption of God into our daily life. That's not fair. You aren't supposed to give out the, no, I'm just teasing. But that's part of it, an absorption of God into our daily life, which you guys can't see because I can't get the screen on, and I'm sorry about that. We'll figure this out, but we can read. And Ellen, who's on there, knows enough to interrupt me, to remind me to take a look at the chat when I need to. So that comes from interaction. Throughout, ask your questions even as we're going along. I'm going to learn from you, and we will all learn from the questions if you ask them. Because if you're having a problem, you don't quite connect it or whatever, you may be the one who has the chutzpah. I'll go to my Yiddish background, the chutzpah, which is kind of like having the backbone to ask the question that others are pondering, but not asking. So feel free, it's okay. Everybody says, well, I don't want to ask a dumb question. And you know the typical response is there are no dumb questions, but there really aren't. Okay. I mean, we can make fun, we can have fun with things and whatnot, but there are really no dumb questions because they're leading us. It may be the Spirit speaking through you to raise something for the rest of us. So feel free. All right, so we're going to start off and primarily.
Pastor Louise had something to say.
Oh, she didn't lean to the right, so I couldn't tell.
No, I put my hand up though.
Go ahead.
Question is, what's the definition?
I'm sorry.
Were you going to tell us that? What's your definition of mysticism?
Hang tight. Details at 11. It won't be page 11, but details at 11. Okay.
Okay.
No, because I want you to hear some of the background. I want you to start formulating your own ideas about this, because this is something that the world knows what mysticism is, but they don't really know what Christian mysticism is. So let's hang tight and we'll go. So who are the Christian mystics and why do they matter today? What can we learn only from them about the love of God, service to the poor, and the life of discipleship? Let's explore the mystic's invitation to each and every one of us to walk into the world and be unleashed to care unselfishly. Now, there's a Peruvian priest, it's Gustavo, and if I mess this up, then I'm sorry, but Gutierrez. He was attending a Wednesday evening church supper. You know, we have those here, so we know what church suppers are, right? More people than usual filled that fellowship hall to meet this unassuming priest, who some have called the father of liberation theology. In his brief meditation after the meal, Father Gutierrez startled everyone with his first words: to truly serve the poor, we need the heart of a mystic. Unless we have the heart of a mystic, we may help the poor, but we will truly not love them. Who are the Christian mystics? What can we learn only from them about the love of God, service to the poor, and the life of discipleship? I want to explore these questions even as we address our wariness about the mystics. Why are we sometimes afraid? Do we find mystics rare and strange because they give themselves completely to God? The mystical experience, as much as anything else, is a gift from God, not a human accomplishment. Nevertheless, we can adopt some of the mystics' practices. For instance, they can teach us spiritually transforming ways of reading scripture, like Bernard of Clairvaux, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, who illustrate the power of the Song of Songs. You all know that portion of the Bible that I'm sure you've studied and memorized, probably not, but it's in the Old Testament. Okay, the Song of Songs. in helping us to shape our understanding of life with God. They give us hope, hope that our languishing love someday will be transformed into a radical eros, a radical, deep, abiding yearning that knows only the language of intimate and intense communion, the song of the bridegroom and his bride. Teresa of Avila's transforming experience of this intense love will allow us and let us listen with our hearts to her words as they are translated into a powerful image of a woman overtaken by the love of the Holy Spirit of God. And the mystics can repair our love for other people in the world. In the writings of Julian of Norwich, we find a salutary correction to our modern, controlling, and destructive stance toward evil. We want solutions that will fix the evil we see: an incurable illness, a broken spinal cord, an evil dictatorship. What Julian proposes instead is that we embrace the mystery of suffering. Only from within that embrace can action grow that truly accords with God's love. So she talks about that in her writing. So we're going to go into that a little bit deeper when we get specifically to her. But again, the point is that we need to embrace the mystery of suffering, ours and everyone else's. And it's through that embracing of that suffering that we become transformed, because that's truly where God meets us. Because as we are suffering, we get to that point of giving up. And we've all been there, where we finally have just given up. And that's when God starts to talk to us, and God starts to walk with us, and God is with us. Not that he wasn't before, but we recognize it at that point because we've broken down all of the walls that separate us at that point in time. Basically, we've given up to him. All right. So how does mystical contemplation prepare us to increase the love of God and neighbor among humankind? Our culture distracts us with raucous noise and glaring lights. Ours is the age of uncollectedness and mindlessness. Contemplation can help us recover our attentiveness, which is essential to serving God in today's world. Intention, attention are two of the keys for walking as a Christian in this world. Not only can we adopt the mystics' practices in our lives, but we may see God through their lives, through their writings, through how they interacted with people. True mystical experience changes the self, making it transparent before God and allowing God's light to shine through to others. It calls for an appropriate, faithful response on the part of Christian recipients. We have examples of like St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi. You all know who they are? You've heard of them? Okay. They're two who led two such transparent selves through whom many Christians have glimpsed the love of God and been inspired to love the world. As we study their stories, as we read about them, as we hear about them, that leads us to a transformation as we try to even think about what they did, why they did, and how they did it. Whenever and wherever mysticism has been divorced from all institutional expression, the church doesn't believe in mysticism. Evelyn Underhill, who was a noted theologian, observed it tends to become strange, vague, or merely sentimental. And she's talking about the church at that point. In her lifelong study of mysticism, she became increasingly aware of the church's role in structuring the mystics' practices and the mystics' role in reforming a culture-distracted church. We get removed from God as church, as a church together, unless the role of the mystic is made important to each and every one of us in our walk. If you take something that is important and was important to Christ in his walk and remove that from what we consider to be the religion, we're removing an essential portion of who we are, right? So we're starting to get a little bit of an idea of what this is. For the reality of church does not abide in us. It is not a spiritual Rotary Club. Its reality abides in one God, the one God, the ever-living one whose triune spirit fills it by filling each one of its members, not only of the triune, but all of us who are part of that triune, because we are all in that holy dance with God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who surround us and who are within us. Should Christian ministers and deacons and teachers be more like mystics than prophets? The answer may be in Jesus' haunting question to Simon Peter, which is why I say to you, Jesus did talk about this. Remember that towards the end, after Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then he meets with him again, and Jesus asks him this question, do you love me? Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The same number of times that Peter denied him, if you think about it. There's a writer, Beasley, who says, as I read the biblical story, I realized that I know what I'm supposed to believe. I know how to be obedient. I know how to be busy at good things. And I have well-informed opinions on the burning ethical issues of our day. But even though I have all of that, I do not know how to be in love with Jesus. I've got my intellect connected, and I know exactly what I'm supposed to do and what the rules and regulations are, but I don't know how to be in love with Jesus. He was a minister, a priest. He was an individual who was up in front of congregations and preaching and teaching. And he learned how to be obedient. And he knows what he's supposed to believe, because you go through classes like this, so you find out what you're supposed to believe, right? And he was good about doing mission and ministry in the world. He was well informed. He knew what was going on. He had the theology right at the tip of his, right at the tip of his tongue or at the end of his fingers, however those sayings go, okay? He knew what the issues were, but he didn't know how to be in love with Jesus. The renewed interest in the lives and works of Christian mystics today, because this is an ongoing kind of thing, especially among a general audience, may result from a need within the church at large, a hunger for a radical encounter with the presence of the triune God. We talk about meeting the triune God when we worship. We like to hope that we are, in fact, encountering the triune God during worship. That's one of the reasons why we worship. But do we really? Do we really? Or do we have a hunger for a radical encounter with that God? As we study the lives and works of the mystics, which we're going to be doing over the next several weeks, we may yet learn to embody a prophetic stance within the world, while at the same time growing in our awareness and love for God. The mystics matter because they can help us see and receive the deep mystery that pervades the entire world. They matter because they can carry us into the depths of divine love. I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to ask for questions or conversation. Anybody have anything they want to? Yes, Louise.
Would you think that a person with ESP tends to have mysticism?
I don't know that somebody with ESP has mysticism, or is that one of the qualities that Jesus spoke against as far as telling the future and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's I don't think that's on the level of connectedness that we're trying to talk about here. Connectedness with that divine love.
Okay, I have I looked up mysticism. I have to tell you, I just wanted to see some definitions and stuff. This says, what makes a person a mystic? A person who claims to attain or believes in the possibility of attaining insight into mysteries transcending ordinary human knowledge as by direct communication with the divine or immediate intuition in a state of spiritual ecstasy, a person initiated into religious mysteries. Does that sound like ESP? What I'm thinking about is, this is another part of my question is, I have a friend who's Catholic, and I also have a friend who just naturally has ESP. she's just gifted with it to me. And my friend that's Catholic always says, oh, you got to really watch out what you say. There could be the devil trying to get into your thinking. And I don't know, we've had conversations about it, but I just was kind of thinking about it from that standpoint.
Well, you have to kind of weigh things from the standpoint of those things like soothsaying and fortune telling are not those things that Christ liked and in fact spoke against them. So I think it depends on what your understanding of ESP is. Do we recognize that Paul had visions? Do we recognize that St. John had visions? Yes, they had visions. I don't know that I would define that as ESP, but rather as God speaking to them in a language that they can understand as they were connected with that divine love. ESP is we kind of, oh, well, what's the other one where I've lived through that? I know exactly what's going to happen now. I forgot what that's called, but
Deja vu.
yeah, deja vu all over again. Thank you. But those kinds of things, I guess, occur, and I don't know how to explain them from that standpoint. But if we go with the basic understanding that what we are trying to do is to get deeper into the depth of that divine love that God has for us and that God will speak to us, that may be a manner that God is speaking with that particular individual, as opposed to the girl in Acts, I think it was, who was hired by two guys because she was able to tell the future until she claimed Christ as being her savior. And then she lost whatever that gift was, that prophetic gift was. And her handlers were really upset because they couldn't make money off of her anymore. I think that's the kind of thing that God is trying to say no to, as opposed to anything else. And then she wanted to know all the secrets so that she could tell the future based upon, and basically she was told, no, that ain't going to happen. That's not how this all works. Okay. I don't know if that helps you, Louise, in your arguments with your friends, but okay. I know that there are courses on understanding our dreams, deja vu, ESP, and how it relates to our spirituality. Some are offered at, I don't know, Kanuga, Kanuga. Anybody know what that is besides? Okay, I don't know. It may be a site for spirituality and Episcopal Retreat Center. Okay. And that may be something that we could go further into, because dreams are not necessarily deja vu. It's not necessarily ESP. That we can branch off into as we continue with the conversation. All right. But dreams and visions, I think, are definitely within the purview of Christianity, without any question whatsoever. Deja vu, maybe ESP, if we take it from the standpoint of the relationship with God, maybe also, depending on definitions and depending on how we view things. But my basic understanding in answer to Louise's question is ESP doesn't really work in that same way unless you have the understanding that it is the development of your relationship with God and delving into that inner relationship. Yes, Louise.
I found that there's more than one definition of mysticism, and the one you're talking about is really it's a positive kind of thing. This one, the second one that's listed here, is kind of what my friend that's the Catholic was talking about. Belief characterized by self-delusion or dreamy confusion of thought, especially when based on the assumption of occult qualities or mysterious agencies.
Of course, that's what you're talking about, because that's what the Catholic Church speaks against. And that's why they say no Christian mystics. But
oh, so they do say that.
yeah, but Julian, well, they used to. Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, all fall within the purview of the Holy Roman Catholic orders and churches. So on the one hand, they may be speaking against that kind of mysticism, but they recognize that there are people who have, I'm sorry, I'm reading a note while I'm saying this. They recognize that there are people who have had connections with the voice of God. So,
Saint Teresa,
I'm sorry,
like Saint Teresa. It says here, Saint Teresa's writings were part of the tradition of Christian mysticism.
right,
That's Teresa of Avila, yeah.
yeah, Teresa of Avila. Okay,
And so was Claire, and so was Saint Francis. And I grew up Catholic and I read all that.
yep,
Yeah, it's acceptable. We were told not to do things like try to do Ouija boards and all that. Based on, there's a part in the Old Testament, Pastor, with Saul, where they try to connect to the spirits of the dead. And it basically, it was explained to us that it was a way of not necessarily letting evil in, but things that you couldn't really understand or comprehend and could drive you kind of, it changed your perception of reality and your relationship to God, or it could. And that was something that wasn't a good idea as a
It was
Christian.
dangerous.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
or more that for us as kids, they didn't want to make it sound too attractive and too, they didn't want it to be too off limits or we get too attracted to it.
the question is, are you connecting with below or are you connecting with above?
Exactly. And evil does exist. And so since that's very specifically, as Pastor said, we're told not to do that,
All right, and then the other portion of it is, as you listen to any words that come from anyone's mouth, mine included, the senior pastors of the church or anywhere else, or you do readings, you are all charged with the responsibility of trying to discern what that all means,
Yes.
okay? And how it works. So you have that responsibility to decide whether or not this is something that connects with the occult or whether this is something that truly is spiritual and connected.
From God. Yep.
Okay. All right. So to dwell in God's love is an experience that lures and invites us. We hear of remarkable people in the Bible and elsewhere who pour themselves out for God. But can we be like them? I mean, we're just poor old folks sitting here in the villages, North Carolina, South Carolina, or West Virginia. Can we be like them? What is the cost of coming so close to God that we want to give our lives to Him? And will we be willing to pay for it? And you think back to, wow, the apostles were really close to Christ. And some of them suffered really pretty hideous deaths. They paid, at least as far as the world is concerned. So what is mysticism and why are we hearing so much about it lately? And I liked, there's a writer who I like, whose name is Emily Griffin, who was connected with the Methodist Church. Anyway, she was at a Methodist church in, I won't pronounce this right, but I'll try it, Natchitoches, Louisiana, okay? And she was facilitating a Sunday night series on prayer and spiritual life. And she was surprised that the question that I raised right at the beginning, what is mysticism and why are we hearing so much about it lately, came up during that study, because mysticism is a term that most ministers don't use often. They use it, if they do, it's sparsely. But here, in the middle of a fellowship dinner, somebody raised the question and she was kind of like shocked. And I got to tell you, when I read that, I was thinking about the fact that I kind of was pleased to hear that question, because for me, in my journey, I knew about Paul as a Jew. And I knew about how the Jews have a practice of connection to try and develop a lifestyle that will allow them to have visions. And visions of Christ are very important, and all visions of God for them is very important. So I got kind of fascinated by it. How do I go about doing it? How can I hook up to it and whatnot? And as I read some more, it became, okay, well, what's this mysticism that we're talking about? Because I had that question. Why? What makes you think we're hearing so much about mysticism lately? Why are Catholics talking about it? Why are Protestants talking about it? Why do you see it when you go into Barnes and Noble and do the New Age stuff? Do you see things about mystics and mysticism? A mystic is a person who is very close to God, one who is far advanced in the spiritual life. But sometimes the word sounds strange to us because guess what? It's not in the Bible. So we can't believe it, right? Because it's not in the Bible. But it's on Google. So if it's on the internet, it's real. No, but seriously, it's not in the Bible. There are mystics in the Bible. Abraham, I would lift as a mystic and his connection with God. Moses, the prophets who heard the voice of God and then proclaimed that voice to those who were within their hearing. And certainly Paul. But the word mystic, as I said to you earlier, doesn't come into use until AD 500. Now, I don't think you wanted a history of mysticism to come in here, but rather an answer to a much more urgent question. After you kind of figure out what it is, can I be one? Can I be a mystic? And what does mysticism have to do with me? That ultimately becomes the reason I think why you all are part of here today. It's not because of my good looks or that I'm offering food, because I can't give that to anybody on Zoom. To dwell in the love of God is deeply attractive. When we talk about it, just doesn't it sound cool? I want to abide in that love, an experience that lures and invites us. We hear of remarkable people, and we all have in the Bible and elsewhere, so beloved of God that they want to move mountains for him. We hear of men and women who pour themselves out for God. We hear of them and we admire them and who they are and what they did. But can we be like them? Can we, sitting here right now, in the ages that we are, be like them? And what will be the cost of coming close to God, that we want to give our lives to him? What is the price? And will we be willing to pay it? Brothers and sisters, well, I guess I'm the only brother, so I'll take that back. But I wrote this hoping that there might be at least one other one here. So no brothers and sisters. We have collectively a fear of heights, by which I mean not only a fear of a spiritual high, but also a fear of what God may ask of those of us who get close to him. Why are we sometimes afraid? We notice how certain men and women have been transformed by grace. And we look at that and we say, wow. We see how these grace-filled men and women are willing to live completely for God. We know that many of Christ's first apostles went to their deaths for his name. We know that many even today are so filled to the brim with Christ that they are called to difficult missions, demanding tasks, even to the point of death. And I think about a couple of people whose names you may have heard of. One is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, minister, safe in New York City, teaching and whatnot. And he went back into the storm of the Third Reich and gave himself up. Edith Stein is another one who comes to mind. Is this why some are wary of mysticism? If I get like that, then that's going to happen to me. Do we find mystics rare and strange because they give themselves completely to God? What makes us wary? Why are people so wary of the word? Too strong? It is what it is. Contemplation is usually a part of being a mystic. But I was taught while studying the Spanish mystics, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, that truly to become one with God, which is the aim of a true mystic, is a lot more is needed. The second edition of the new, shorter Oxford English Dictionary defines mysticism as the belief or mental tendencies characteristic of mystics. I love when they define words with the words that you're trying to figure out what they mean. Belief in the possibility of union with or absorption into God by means of contemplation and self-surrender. Okay, now we're getting closer to things we can understand. Belief in or reliance on the possibility of spiritual apprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect. In other words, it doesn't come from our mind. but it comes from elsewhere. I remember that a lot of commentators and writers that I read thought that a true mystic fits into a certain physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual profile. Not everyone can become one. Sorry to rabbit on, but I just don't think you can equate contemplation and mysticism. They are steps on the same journey, but millions more can contemplate or learn how to than can become a true mystic. That's something that cannot be learned. Now, there's a theologian, John Williams, who I heard about at one point in time, and in some of his writings, he struck on this. A point that I think fits perfectly with a theologically Christian view of mysticism. The state of intimate communion with God that sets mystics apart is a gift of grace. That 5-letter word that continues to lift its head. The mystics do not ask to be mystics. They want to know God as deeply as they can, and they know their limits. They admit their flaws, their sinfulness, their need for God's redeeming love and grace. They come as beggars to the throne, not saying, Lord, make me a mystic, but rather, Lord, I want to know you better. It's a beautiful thought. I'd agree with John Williams that contemplation is not mysticism, but a step along the way. At the same time, those who are called to prayer, to contemplative prayer, and perhaps ultimately to mystical prayer, must choose to accept the gift. God gives us gifts, and I'll share with you one of the gifts that I have to kind of give you an example on this. And it's a weird gift, and I don't wish it upon anyone else. But whenever I meet with any of you, I look in your eyes. And then as I look in your eyes, of course, what I try to do is to see Christ. But what will happen when I make that connection is there is a vibration or a sound that comes from you that I can hear. Okay? So if you're joyful, I can hear your joy. If you're in pain, I can hear your pain. And when you go into a group of people, you have this cacophony of sounds that became very hard for me to deal with in the initial, because I didn't understand what was going on. And I was with a friend who said, this may be a gift that God is revealing to you that's yours now. And I didn't want it. I didn't want it at all. You imagine walking into a sanctuary with, in my situation, 100 people that you know really well, 150 people that you really know well, who you walk with outside the sanctuary and in, and you hear the distress. It's not a beautiful sound at all with the cacophony of noise. And yet I learned that I didn't have to deal with it. There's a great empath who we all believe in, and that's Jesus. And so I learned what it meant to lay those things down at the foot of the cross, which then allowed me to understand how I could use that gift in working with other people. Do I still hear it? Yeah, but I know how to get rid of it and how to deal with it. So God gives us these weird and strange gifts, and you may be looking at me and saying, oh, come on. But we're all part of the body, the one body, and we all have different gifts and talents. As I said to the prayer group, my portion of being the body of Christ may be a hair follicle because I don't have any. I don't know, but we're all part of that, and we aren't all necessarily the eyes, and we aren't all necessarily the ears, but we are all important to the entire body of Christ. People who accept this, people like these on the way to being mystics, have opened themselves up to the practice of spiritual life, including forms of meditation and prayer. Okay, so it's all part of. Contemplation is a portion of mysticism. Mysticism accomplishes or it includes contemplation, but contemplation is not mysticism, if that makes any sense. Yes, Louise, you're probably going to my next topic. Go
Probably
ahead.
not.
Go ahead.
You know how you were saying you could look into people's eyes and hear, kind of, well, identify with, well, I can't really describe what you just said, but is something similar to that being able to see auras?
I would think so.
Auras around people?
Yeah. Because again, it's a gift. If you recognize it as a gift, if you recognize it and accept it as a gift, okay? But then you have to understand and learn how to work with that gift that you are given. So we're getting down to what Louise has asked and everyone else 3 or 4 times. What is a mystic? In the Western tradition, the mystical life is focused on union with and intimacy with God. Historically, the term mystic is drawn from a Greek word, mystikos, and my pronunciation is as close as I can make it, which refers to someone who has special knowledge. The term is applied to someone remarkable, someone spiritually advanced. For most of us, the term mystic suggests a person who has ecstatic experiences, who has these great visions and other spiritual gifts. And I'm sure that definition makes it too narrow, because there are truly many quiet, unrecognized mystics, mystics who fly, if you will, below the radar. They are close to God, transformed by that relationship, but never may look like what we think a mystic is supposed to look like in our eyes or in the eyes of others. In fact, being a mystic has little to do with visions or ecstasies. Instead, a mystic is a person far advanced in the spiritual life, one who very likely spends time in prayer and worship with a disciplined regularity. Wouldn't such a definition include a large number of people if you think about it? Not only that, but also no formal process exists to identify the mystics. The title of mystic is awarded by an informal consensus or a common opinion. So I don't claim to be a mystic. I like to try and get as close to God as I possibly can. I don't know the path to do that except through my contemplative and prayer practices. And there may be that I don't know. You guys may know. I don't know. But today it's become commonplace to speak of the spiritual life as a journey or sometimes a walk with Christ. Y'all have heard that, right? Heard it preached, I'm sure. Although those who are plunged into the life of the Spirit may not have enough objectivity to describe where they are on that journey, the terminology is still useful. Early Christian thinkers suggest that the spiritual life is a recognizable path, often described in terms of awakening, purgation, illumination, and union. Most of us receive that wisdom and abide by it. We are glad to know that a path exists and anticipate what may lie ahead. But spiritual directors and spiritual guides, okay, will continually remind you that the grace of God is highly unpredictable. Should I say that again? The grace of God is highly unpredictable. God's plan for each person is unique to that person. The idea of recognized stages, I suppose, is reassuring, but it shouldn't be confining. No one should be trying to second guess who's leading. God's? Yeah, we can't second guess it. We shouldn't be trying to. Where am I on the path? Am I out of the purgative stage yet and into the illuminative way? Usually spiritual teachers say that beginners in prayer get a great infusion of joy and delight when you first start, followed after a while by a time of dryness. You do your prayer, you're doing everything, it feels really good, and then it's like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What's going on? I don't feel that connection. I don't understand, because that happens. It's part of what happens during the process. That may happen for most of us, but there really are no rules about the spiritual life. It's an adventure into uncharted waters, the waters of grace that come from God. Clearing it all up for you, because I can tell just looking at each and every one of you. I know I am, baby. All right, so I want to talk about what we can learn from the mystics. And I mentioned Evelyn Underhill. Back in the 20s, she wrote kind of a current, at least for that age, primer about mystics and mysticism. And I had the book title with me, and I don't exactly know where it is because I didn't put it in a note, but I'll send it out to you in case anybody wants to look at it. It's still available on Kindle or Amazon. Evelyn Underhill suggests that the mystics are lamps to our feet, inspiring us to know the love of God firsthand. She calls them expert mountaineers, if you will. Many mystics write and speak passionately about a great love that has been poured out on them from God. Certain biblical texts give as evidence of God's love and tenderness. Consider his words to us in Jeremiah. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Similar outpourings are found in Hosea and in the Gospel of John. But the mystics in many centuries are not just reading about this love. They are experiencing it. They're getting out of our head and into our heart. They're experiencing it and giving witness of that intense love and friendship with God. They invite us to come closer to God, to risk experiencing that love and to be transformed by God's affections. We are inclined to suppose that most mystics lived hundreds of years ago. Possibly we think so because the mystics we've heard of lived far in the past. The ones that we've heard of, we've talked about a little bit. Francis of Assisi, Teresa of Avila, and her younger colleague, John of the Cross. Widely known for his teaching, and you may have heard this in a sermon at some point in time or a study that you've had, the dark night of the soul. That time when everything appears to be so blank and so dark that you don't know where God is. But even in the wormholes that are in the universe, they found even pinpricks of light. So the light is always with us, even in those darkest times and darkest moments. And that's what John of the Cross talked about in his writings. Yet many remarkable Christians of more recent date are truly mystics. I'll cite for you, like Richard Rohr, you may have heard about, Henri Nouwen, both Catholics, doesn't matter, that's okay. There's a funny guy who did a lot of writing back in 1517, Martin Luther. He had mystical experiences that he wrote about, okay? So those of you who are Lutheran and have been for life, who say, check your Lutheranism again, because Martin Luther is considered to be. So there are people that you don't think about as being mystics who have in fact had that mystical experience because of the connection that they have had with God. Are the mystics beyond us? Oh, I didn't finish that, I'm sorry. I don't find it strange that contemporary people are deeply attracted by mystical prayer with its promises of a deeper knowledge that God is what God is like. Generous, compassionate, and overflowing with comfort and joy. Isn't that beautiful if we can connect with that on a regular basis? Are the mystics beyond us? For those overloaded with day-to-day responsibilities, the idea of becoming a mystic seems far from attainable. Many of us want a deep relationship with God, but feel that the mystic path demands too much for us. Such reluctance may be a kind of wisdom. It's not desirable to set for oneself impossible goals. We should not attempt the spiritual life as if we could, under our own steam, achieve a high level of greatness. Although a certain discipline is good for the spiritual life. Spiritual transformation depends upon, and you've heard this now several times, the grace of God and comes as a pure gift. It's best to stick to the gospel teachings about humility, adopting the tax collector's attitude rather than the attitude of the Pharisee. And you know what that comes from? And if you don't, that's when Jesus was watching a Pharisee praying. That's when he was watching a poor man sitting off on the side and praying. And the Pharisee was up there with all of his robes and everything else and standing and proclaiming all these wonderful, wonderful and great things and looking askance at that tax collector who said only these words, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus commended that. And that prayer became what became known as the Jesus prayer, where you say, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And that's one that's prayed throughout Christianity, Eastern and Western. Even so, with all of that, I'm moved by the words of C.S. Lewis, who was reticent about the inner life, protesting that he was not the man to speak about such matters. He said this about the mystical knowledge of God. All that can be said here is that even on those high levels, though something goes from man to God, yet all, including the something, comes from God to man. If he rises, he does so lifted on the wave of the incoming tide of God's love for him. He becomes nothing in that ascension. His love is perfected by becoming, in a sense, nothing. He's less than a mote in the sunbeam, in that sunbeam, vanishes not from God's sight, but from ours and his own, into the nuptial solitude of the love that loves love, and in love of all things. Yes.
Can you go back? Love is perfected. Read that again, please. A few lines ahead, maybe.
Yeah, I know. His love is perfected by becoming, in a sense, nothing. In other words, you aren't identifying yourself, but rather you become a part of the whole. So that self-identification disappears. I think that's what he's trying to say. And I'm open to anybody adding in or saying anything about that. I haven't kept up with Kay's notes. Oh, okay. She's paraphrasing from my words. You can see that when you do the report. Anyway, so I like that because it talked about and gave you kind of a set of symbols that we all can kind of maybe tie into. Nuptial solitude. Does that sound like the hale-hearty English professor who gathered his friends for a literary pub crawl? This is C.S. Lewis, and loved long walks in the countryside with large cups of tea? Doesn't sound like that at all. The fact is that we, ordinary men and women, are among God's chosen, and the Lord wants to speak most intimately to our hearts. In his sermon, The Weight of Glory, Lewis speaks in a similar extravagant language about how we are to become gods and goddesses in the life to come. Now, in light of the fact that we have an hour, in theory, and I have about 20 more minutes of things, I leave it to you all. Do you want to continue this next week? Or do you want to continue?
Continue.
Online? You want to keep going for a while?
I have to go, but you guys go and I'll watch the recording. Is that okay, Pastor?
I'm going to, oh, of course it is. But I don't know who's going to remind me to do things. So, Ellen, bless you. I'm going to talk about a mysticism of service and mysticism that still matters. Because
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
God. So a mysticism of service, both Thomas Merton and Karl Rahner, who are modern Catholic thinkers, they insist on a mysticism of ordinary living. For Merton, the incarnation has sanctified all of human life. Far from taking the contemplative person above and beyond the ordinary, contemplation, if it is authentic, roots the human being in the ordinary. The ordinary routine of daily life becomes the texture of contemplation for the devoted Christian. Merton was a Catholic monk, insists that there is a latent or implicit infused dimension to all prayer. Thus, Merton gives us a valuable insight into the possibility of an ordinary or hidden mysticism, because he calls it, or he refers to it as masked contemplation. Perhaps this masked contemplation is like what John Wesley saw as a mysticism of service, that is to say, a close friendship with Christ, which expresses itself in love of neighbor. Merton sees the hidden or masked contemplative as one who finds God in active service to the poor, the despised, the people at the margins of life. These masked contemplatives do not have the luxury to spend long hours in silence and solitude, but their mystical encounter with Jesus comes in service to the littlest and the least. They are mystics, perhaps, without even knowing it, for they are in touch fully with the heart of God. Nevertheless, their mysticism is authentic. In different language, Karl Renner makes a similar claim. Everyone is called to the immediacy of God's presence. A supernatural, grace, anonymously Christian mysticism may even exist outside of Christianity. That is to say, Christ himself may be working outside of established Christianity to be in touch with mystics, known and unknown, in all parts of the world. Renner sets no limits on the power of God and writes, in every human being, there is something like an anonymous, unthematic, perhaps repressed basic experience of being oriented to God, which is constitutive of man and his concrete makeup or nature and grace, which can be repressed by that man, but not destroyed, which can and is mystical, or if you prefer a more cautious terminology, has its climax in what the older teachers called infused contemplation. We aren't talking about universalism. Go ahead.
So that's dormant in everybody.
In everybody. It's what leads people to want to come together. It's what leads people who want to go to, all right, think about the number of people that each and every one of you know who you say, boy, if they were going to church, they'd be great Christians because they love people. They do God's work. They just don't understand what they're doing. That's dormant within them. Okay. So when we say that we should go out and live the Bible so that people see what God has done in our lives and we can talk about it with others, we're talking about being able to connect on that level. But I'm also saying, I'm not talking about a universalism, but rather something that abides within each and every one of us that is part of us who are created. How are we created? In their image, the image of God. So it isn't universalism. Rather, Renner says that God is everywhere at work and everywhere takes the divine initiative. He does not say that all human beings equally recognize and respond to that call, but rather does not envision a mysticism of inwardness alone. So it's not the question of just, okay, I got it, I'm here. No, it's not like that at all. Instead, he sees a mystical dimension in many aspects of living, a mysticism of eating, of drinking, of sleeping, of walking, of sitting, and other everyday events. Beyond these instances, Renner sees Christ coming to meet us in our loneliness, our rejections, our unrequited loves, and our faith in the face of death. You're writing like crazy. You want me to repeat that?
Yeah, please.
Remember, you also have the tape. Okay. He sees Christ coming to meet us in our loneliness, our rejections, our unrequited loves, and our faith in the face of death. Now, the reason I wanted to continue on because I want to give you this so that you can think about it between now and the next time. And you do have on that study guide some questions. We'll go through the next time a little bit. Okay, so think about those. But mysticism still matters, even with everything that we've said. And I'm not sure where you are with any of this at this point in time, but it still matters. Far from taking the contemplative person above and beyond ordinary contemplation, if it is authentic, roots the human being in the ordinary. In other words, all of this is to root the human being in the ordinary, and to be that person connected with God at all moments of our life. We've heard of praying to Paul, praying incessantly.
I
all
thought
the
that was
time.
more a Catholic.
I'm sorry,
I thought that was more a Catholic
a
thing.
Catholic thing. If you're
I
using,
wasn't
my
a
dear-
churchgoer for many years, so
you were what?
I wasn't a church goer for many years as an adult, so maybe I.
No, you're fine. What I was going to say to you is, it is a Catholic thing if you want to use a small c, which recognizes the universal Catholic as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church. So if it's authentic, it roots the human being in the ordinary. The ordinary routine of daily life becomes the texture of contemplation for the devoted Christian. And I have a course that I do on wisdom, which is a long one. But one of those things that we talk about through that is the Benedictine order and how they order life. And they order life around prayer and making even the mundane a prayer. So that's kind of what they're talking about here. To speak of mystics today is to risk misunderstanding. A Jesuit scholar, Thomas Corbishley, has noted there is a bewildering variety in definitions and strains of mysticism. Many Christians, and I think mistakenly, associate mystics exclusively with cults, Eastern religions, ignoring our long Christian centuries of intimate union with God and Jesus Christ. I think such a view is too limited. In biblical history, in the early Christian communities and later Christianity in the church today, mysticism still matters, for it brings us close to God, who whispers and guides. It's wrong, though commonplace, to equate mysticism with visions and ecstasies. And then we get back to Louise's question from a little bit earlier. A better interpretation may be found in the writings of Dallas Willard, a Baptist. I'm covering everybody here, who speaks of God's guidance as a reality in contemporary life. Willard writes eloquently of the way God speaks to us. He insists upon the Christian life as graced renovation of the heart. Other 20th and 21st century Christian writers speak of the mystical life, always with some modesty. And I'm thinking here of people I've already mentioned in part, Henri Nouwen, Richard Rohr, both Roman Catholics, of Richard Foster, who was a Quaker, who has renewed a current interest in many spiritual disciplines practiced by Christians in all centuries. And he has a book on Christian practices and disciplines. In his book, Streams of Living Water, Foster describes 6 Christian traditions, all of which are rooted in Christ. And one of the 6 is the contemplative or prayer-filled life. Another Quaker, Caroline Stephen, has written, a true mystic believes that all men have, as he himself is conscious of having, an inward life, into which, as into a secret chamber, he or she can retreat at will. In this inner chamber is found a refuge from the multitude of cares and pleasures and agitations which belong to the life of the senses and the affections, from human judgments, from all change and chance and turmoil and distraction. One finds there first repose, then a guidance, a light which burns and purifies, a voice which subdues. One finds themselves in the presence of God. How like Paul's words to the Athenians, God is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have being. That's my introduction. And with that, we'll end today's session. But yeah, go ahead.
What you mentioned earlier, why do you think mysticism is being heard about more? What are your thoughts on that?
But I think people are searching for things. You know, you've probably heard or noticed that a lot of people who used to be Christians are not practicing anymore. They're looking for something else. They church shop to go from one place to another to another. They go from one religion to another religion. They go to Buddhism. They go here, they go there. They're on a search because things that they know they should be hearing and be talked about aren't happening within traditional environments. Okay. I don't feel that here, and I've been around. Okay. I've been the guy who was brought up as a Catholic, who worshiped as a Jew for 30 plus years, who was a Methodist minister who came here. Okay. And I'm going to tell you that with the preaching that goes on here, and many of you may find it anything, well, you have your own ways of defining things. The preaching that goes on here is truly one that is leading us to the Spirit. We just have to open ourselves up to it. Does that mean that every sermon that you hear from every one of the ministers who you've heard preach here or will hear preach over the course of whatever the period of time is, speaks specifically to you? No. God is speaking to the people who need to hear him speak on that particular day. So you may go several days or several Sundays and say, okay, well, that was good. Thanks. And then you'll walk into that service that day, and you all have experienced this, I'm sure, where you say, that was aimed just at me. Thank you. And then you'll go up and you'll say to the minister, thanks. You said such and such and so and so. And the minister will say these words to you because I've been there. I did. But we all recognize doing what we do, that if we can get out of God's way, what needs to be said will be said.
So what goes into when you do a sermon? Do you feel that voice telling you what to include in that sermon?
Through prayer. See, everybody is different. I think most ministers will tell you that any sermons that they put together probably takes them about 20 hours between researching, reading commentaries, and trying to make that connection with God. So when you start spending that much time doing things, yeah, you're hopeful, but it's never, John, this is what I want you to say. But it does come out like that. I tell the story, and a couple of my people, one of my congregations know it well. They were working in the food pantry, which the way our church was set up, it was at the rear of the sanctuary because I wanted people to know that we were doing this ministry and mission. Okay. And my living space was on one side of the food pantry after I had my accident, and my office was on the other side. So I was frequently walking back and forth, especially when the food pantry was alive and people knew or active. And people who worked in there knew that Monday I did a lot of work. Sunday afternoon, Monday I did a lot of work on my sermon. Tuesday I'd start bringing my notes together and start writing, and maybe by Wednesday I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do, because I tried to order myself so that I would do that. And I walked through on a Tuesday. I said, well, how's it going? I said, I got it. And I did. I already had my sermon done Monday afternoon. Had it all written up. Saw him again on Thursday. I said, so you're all set with that? And I said, nope, I ripped that one up, threw it away. Wrote another sermon, finished it up Saturday. Loved it. I thought it was just absolutely special. Got up to preach that morning, stood in front of the congregation, looked out, and I'm a transcript guy, okay? Because I want to make sure that I'm saying everything I'm supposed to. And I took my 6, 7, 8 pages, whatever it was, ripped them up and threw them out into the, of course, the person who cleaned the church was really ticked at me later, but in any event, I tossed it out. And I spoke for 25 minutes. We weren't recorded. I got no idea what I said. but they loved it because it was them speaking. Hi, Debbie. Yeah, they loved it. So you don't know. And that happens. I won't say that happened every time, but that happens often where all of a sudden, and it became, for me, more evident when I was doing the quote unquote same sermon for two different churches. Because I would start off at 9 o'clock at one, and then I would go to the other one at 11 o'clock. And in that, because it was in the country, so you had to travel. And that 15 minutes drive between the two churches, things would change dramatically from one moment to the next, based on the grace of God. That's all you can say, because I got no idea why else. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yes.
I can relate to things changing. I was a teacher and I sometimes had to give the same lecture, 4 times in a row. And I never did it the same way twice.
Or you
Each one
recognize,
was just a little bit
yeah,
different.
or you recognize that the audience you did the first one for, it might have been great,
Mhm.
but the kids you had in the next class
Okay,
had
like
different whatevers,
Mhm.
I don't know, whatever you want to call them, different attitudes or different perspectives or
Mhm.
whatnot. And you knew that as a teacher that
Mhm.
you had to change it up. So, yeah,
Interesting.
I want to thank you all for
Thank
coming
you.
and participating. I
Very
hope to see you all next week, and use the study guide as kind of a review.
Mhm.
Kay, all right, hang on. For the people who are here, I'm gonna end the recording at this point in time. Wish you all well. And we will talk again soon. Kay, if you want to, wait a second, I haven't done it yet.